Today's video is sponsored by Snooping Around, the new Peanuts biopic. Find out all of Snoopy's dark secrets that occurred behind the scenes, from his drug addiction, to his affair with Lassie, to his rivalry with Scooby-Doo.
Watch it, Alan, I'm shooting.
Welcome back to my channel, everybody. We got a top 10 list for you all today. I've been wanting to do a top 10 list for a while, just racking my brains out of what I wanted to do. And you know what? I love Japanese horror movies, so why not do a top 10 list of Japanese horror? I was obsessed with Japanese horror back in high school, and I blame that on my friend Rob. He worked with me at the movie theater that I worked at the time. He was the one who introduced me not just to Japanese horror, but Asian horror in general, and I will always be grateful to him for that, because he introduced me to a lot of great movies. Also, a shout out and a rest in peace to Roger Swan. He was one of the first YouTube channels that I watched when I first started getting into YouTube. Rest in peace, Roger Swan. He also introduced me to many great Japanese horror movies. I focus so much on Italian horror on this channel because, let's face it, I love Italian horror, but I want to show some love for the other country that gave me so many great horror movies. I love Asian horror in general, but Japanese horror, that was the first obsession. Before we get into the list, I've got two honorable mentions for you. I've seen these movies on quite a few Japanese horror lists. The only reason they're not on this list is because I personally don't see them as actual horror movies. This is one of those scenarios where I can understand why people would call them horror. I can also understand why people would not call them horror. And we're going to bang these two out right now. The two honorable mentions are Battle Royale and Ichi the Killer. I absolutely love these two movies. If this were a top 10 list of just favorite Japanese movies in general, they would be in the top 5, probably even the top 3. Ichi the Killer is my favorite Takashi Miike movie. The only reason that they are not on this list is because, for me, they're not really horror movies. Battle Royale is more of an action movie, and I view Ichi the Killer as more of an over-the-top Yakuza movie. Both are gory as hell, and highly recommended from me. They just don't... I just don't personally think they belong on a list of Japanese horror movies. And now we have to get the typical disclaimer out of the way, which I always say is a shame that we have to do this. But here we go. This is a top 10 list of my personal favorite Japanese horror movies. This being YouTube, or the internet in general, people choose to get angry at someone's own personal taste in movies. It especially happens in top 10 lists. Why isn't this movie on the list? Why is this movie on the list? And I will say what I say all the time. It has no effect on anything. My taste in movies doesn't affect you, your taste in movies doesn't affect me. It's literally one of the least important things out there. If you don't see a movie on this list, oh well, you can still have it on your list and enjoy it. If there's a movie on this list that you don't like, well, you don't have to watch it. And now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into the top 10. Number 10, Tokyo Gore Police. Yeah, we're already off to a bang here. A gory bang. Tokyo Gore Police is an entry in the Japanese hyper-gore films, and you're going to see another one of these on the list. I get a kick out of the hyper-gore Japanese films because these movies have crazy plots, and they just go for it. You can tell they don't have a huge budget. They have a decent budget, but with a lot of the stuff they want to do, you can tell they didn't have that much money to do it with, but they still managed to crank out a good, entertaining, crazy movie, and I respect that so much. I love when, even if a movie doesn't have a huge budget, they still go all out with their crazy, crazy idea. This one stars Shinya, and I know I butchered that name, and I'm probably going to butcher a lot of other names, so apologies in advance. You're going to see her a few more times on this list as well. This takes place in the not-too-distant future of Japan. The police force has been privatized, and they're out to hunt this new breed of mutants known as engineers. The thing about these people is, if you cut off a limb, it'll grow back, but it doesn't grow back as a limb, it grows back as like a weapon or something. So someone will get their arm cut off and it'll grow back as a chainsaw. Tribute to Evil Dead. Someone gets their eyes plucked out, they'll be replaced with shotguns. It gets so crazy with what you see growing out of people. It's just a crazy plot. The main character, she's such a badass. Her main weapon is a katana, because why not? If you're gonna have so much arterial spray, you might as well have something that creates that arterial spray. The effects work is really good in this movie. I mean, yeah, it's over the top and cartoony, that's the whole point, but it is well done. For cartoony gore, it's very good cartoony gore. Every character in this movie has more blood in their body than any human being could possibly have, but that's the point, okay? This is an over-the-top movie, and so you're not going in here for realism, you're going in for lunacy. But all in all, I do think this one is a good introduction to the Japanese hyper-gore films, and I love it just because of how crazy it gets. We're gonna have another one of these on the list later on, I won't tell you what it is, but yes, Tokyo Gore Policed, so much bloody fun. Number 9, Tetsuo The Iron Man. We've gone from crazy to crazy in this next one. This is one of the reasons why I like seeing movies outside of America, because they're so different to us. Every country has their own unique style with films. Other than the language, of course, when you watch a Japanese movie, you know you're watching a Japanese movie. When you're watching an Italian movie, you know you're watching an Italian movie. Tetsuo the Iron Man is such a unique movie. When it comes to Iron Men, I like this one more than the Tony Stark Iron Man. This is one of those weird, abstract horror movies, something along the lines of Eraserhead, but I really like this one. It has more of a body horror edge to it, and it's got such a bizarre plot. You have this guy and his girlfriend, they ran over someone, and instead of going for help, they get out of the car and start having sex, the old vehicular manslaughter fetish. And it turns into one of these sort of abstract, kind of a revenge, supernatural revenge movie. We see someone shoving metal into their body, and then when we cut back to the guy who did the hit and run, as the movie goes on, metal starts fusing to his body. He starts getting metal attached to him, and it starts making its way into his body. And then parts of his body start turning into metal. He slowly starts turning into this weird robot man. But not in a mechanical way, like I said, in a supernatural way, because literally metal, anything that's metal fuses to his body, and then his body starts slowly turning into metal. It's very grotesque. The most notorious scene in this movie, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but I think I should mention it just so people who have not seen this have an idea of what kind of movie they're getting into. There's a scene where Robot Man, or soon-to-be Robot Man, is getting frisky with his girlfriend, and then his penis turns into a drill. Let that sink in. Tetsuo The Iron Man is definitely a movie that's not for everyone. There's not much else I can say about it other than the fact that it's really weird. But weird in a good way, weird in a fascinating way. You watch Tetsuo The Iron Man, you can't look away from the screen just because of how bizarre it is. If you're a fan of David Lynch, especially Eraserhead, I do think you will enjoy Tetsuo The Iron Man. Even if you're not a fan of these kinds of movies, I do recommend checking it out just so you can say that you have seen it. Just because I don't know if you'll like it, but I guarantee you're never gonna forget it. So, Tetsuo The Iron Man. Weird stuff, but in the best possible way. Number 8, Horrors of Malformed Men. This is one of those movies that I've reviewed already on my channel. The more I watch it, the more I love it, just because it's such a disturbing idea and such an interesting movie. It's a unique movie. We've seen some movies like this, but there's nothing like Horrors of Malformed Men. This came out in 1969, and it gets pretty disturbing as it gets to the second act of the film. It's graphic, not in a violence way, but in a nudity way. There's a lot of nudity in this flick. And there are a lot of moments that are genuinely disturbing, but it's not as bloody as you would expect it to be, especially from the title, The Horrors of Malformed Men. And it does take a while to get to the creepy stuff, but the story leading up to that is so intriguing. You have this guy who was committed, and he eventually escapes and finds out about this man that he looks just like this man. It's his doppelganger. And he's trying to find out who this person is, so he takes on the role of this dead man, starts trying to live his life, learn about this family, and it's intriguing. I won't say it's action-packed, but it's intriguing. And then it eventually leads to this island which was made as a utopia for deformed people. This is where it goes from intriguing to disturbing, and there's so much imagery on this island, so many creepy images, so many wild images, a lot that I can't show because, again, there is so much nudity in this flick. This is another movie that's not for everybody. It is a lot more accessible than Tetsuo the Iron Man, but again, this is not for everybody. It is a slow-paced movie. Not a bad-paced movie, but a slow-paced movie. It does get disturbing in the final act. It does get weird as the movie goes on. But it's an enjoyable Japanese horror movie with an interesting premise, a great villain. I love Horrors of Malformed Men. Number 7, Maribito.
私は F を人間として育てることを放棄した。
This movie is just creepy, and it's weird because there are a lot of scenes where it seems like not much is happening, but just the way everything's done in this movie, it just has this overall creepy feeling to it, so that even when not much is happening, you're still creeped out. The movie was directed by Takashi Shimizu, who is the same guy who did Ju-on: The Grudge, and I actually have a soft spot for the Grudge series, the original Japanese movies. I like the American remake and the American remake sequel. Ju-on 2, Ju-on the Grudge 2, which is my favorite of the series, almost made it onto this list, but it ended up getting knocked off. My favorite Takashi Shimizu movie is Maribito, because it's just so creepy and it's so different from his other stuff.
だが、己の死を恐れる時の恐怖は凡庸なのだ。
The movie stars Shinji Tsukamoto, who is the director of Tetsuo The Iron Man. He's a cameraman for hire, but he has this obsession with fear. He wants to know what scares people. Not so much a fear of dying. He doesn't think it's interesting when people are afraid to die. He's interested in when people are so scared that they would rather die than deal with this fear. He's set off by this suicide that he just so happens to film in a train station, and he's fixated on the look on the guy's face before he ends himself. And this takes him down this rabbit hole, not quite a rabbit hole that you would expect a movie like this to go down. Maribito touches on the idea of the hollow earth theory, and when it comes to the hollow earth theory, there are two theories. One is that the world is completely hollow inside like an empty eggshell, and the other one is that there are massive caverns below the surface of the earth, and there are actually civilizations in these massive caverns. He eventually, and this is not a spoiler, but he eventually makes his way into one of these caverns and finds this young woman chained up in one of these caverns. He unlocks her and takes her home, and the rest of the movie is just us following him, living his life with this girl, becoming obsessed with this girl, not wanting to give this girl up, but wondering what this girl is. She looks human, but she crawls on all fours. She acts very animalistic, and when you open her mouth, she has fangs, like 4 fangs, 8 fangs, 2 on top, 2 on bottom. And he eventually learns that the only thing she can consume is blood. Now, I want to clarify something here. Yes, this is a girl who needs to drink blood or eat blood in order to live, but this is not an overall gory movie. This is not so much a body count movie. There's actually a pretty small body count, much less than you would expect for a movie like this about someone who needs to drink blood in order to survive. It's less about the body count and more about the creepy atmosphere and just what the hell is up with this girl? Why was she in this underground cavern? And there's a lot of stuff here that I don't want to spoil, but it's just so good and, like I said, so creepy. Maribito, creepy, different, explores the idea of the hollow earth theory. I do wish it explored it a little more than it was, but despite that, still very well done, very creepy movie. Number 6, Strange Circus. When you're a fan of Japanese cinema, especially if you're a fan of Japanese horror, you've heard of Takashi Shimizu, you've heard of Takashi Miike, and you've heard of Sion Sono. He is probably the less sung of the three, but he's still pretty well known, and he makes some fantastic movies. And Strange Circus is definitely a disturbing one. I'm just gonna say, from here on out, trigger warning. You know, all the triggers, okay? Just be ready for triggers. This is a horror movie about pedophilia and incest. That is the subject matter of this horror movie. And yeah, that's a delicate subject matter to deal with, but the thing is, like, it's handled, I don't want to say in a tasteful way, but it's handled in a way that makes the story easier to stomach. I am one of those people that thinks that when it comes to film, nothing is sacred. You can make a movie about anything. It's all about context. And the important thing in a movie like this, okay, you know, horror movies are about horrible things, and the subject matter of this movie is horrible. And I do think it's important on movies to touch on this, because as much as we don't want to think about it, this stuff does happen. And so a movie like Strange Circus brings this kind of stuff to light. We follow this abused 12-year-old girl named Mitsuko, who's forced to watch her parents have sex through a peephole in a cello case. And it gets even worse from there. Her father eventually rapes her, and it's just, you feel icky about it, of course. Of course, anybody would in that situation. But eventually, the movie switches gears, and we're no longer following Mitsuko, we're following this wheelchair-bound novelist named Taiko, who appears to be writing about Mitsuko's story. It all seems to be a book, and it leads you asking all these questions. Is she Mitsuko, just in a different, you know, personality? Did Mitsuko even exist? Is Mitsuko somebody that she knew in the past? It gets pretty weird, and it gets kind of trippy because we keep going back to this dream sequence, which is this Strange Circus, and the movie, Strange Circus, there you go.
Stop!
But again, I want to focus on the fact that they do handle the subject matter well. Like, again, this is a movie about a sexually abused 12-year-old girl, but we never see it happen. We never see her being abused. It's all suggested. The way they handle it, we don't see what happens, but we see somebody else seeing it happen, and they go and they back away. It either happens behind closed doors. It's handled in a more suggested way, which again makes it easier to stomach. It's still hard to watch, but okay, at least there's nothing on screen. You know, they clearly, when making this movie, they protected the child. If you're going to do this kind of subject matter, it's very delicate subject matter to handle, but you gotta do it the right way, and I think Strange Circus handles it in the right way. And this is a beautiful, beautiful movie. I would make the argument that this is one of the most beautiful looking horror movies ever, because there is a lot of abstract imagery, but again, the way that everything's handled, the colors, everything, it does look beautiful. It's just such dark subject matter. Again, handled well. I cannot stress that enough, but I completely understand people not wanting to watch this movie because of the subject matter. I get it. If you're a fan of darker movies, if you're a fan of more disturbing movies, if you don't mind being incredibly depressed after watching this movie, I would recommend Strange Circus. If you're someone who isn't sure about a movie like this, I would recommend doing some research first before going into this one. See if it's one that you can handle. But yeah, if you can handle this, I do recommend Strange Circus. Just brace yourself for a very dark, very depressing time. Number 5, Hell Driver. I did a review on Hell Driver not too long ago, so I'll try not to spend too much time on this, but yeah, this is my favorite of the Japanese hyper-gore films. It's so much fun. It's also become one of my favorite zombie movies because it's so different from other zombie movies. I love when a zombie movie tries to do something different, because the zombies here, they have different levels of intelligence. Some of them are your typical shambling zombies. Some have a little more intelligence. Some are full-blown intelligent. They can use tools. They can do all this other stuff. They can talk. And you have Ihishina in here again. Again, apologize for the butchery of the name. But you have her in this movie again as the zombie queen who sort of manipulates all the zombies. Due to a meteorite or something, this ash spreads around Japan, turning these people into zombies with this antler-shaped tumor on their heads. And they can only die by destroying this tumor. The tumor explodes. But if you don't destroy the tumor, then they still live. Their hands can move around. They can combine, like body parts can combine into something else. Zombies can combine into something else. And our heroine of the movie, she's a girl who is turned into a super soldier that has a weapon that's a cross between a katana and a chainsaw. I talked about this in my review. It's impractical as hell, but it's awesome. This is a movie that is not taking itself seriously at all. It's just trying to give you a fun, gory time, and that is the perfect weapon for a movie like this. I just love the imagination of this movie. There might be a little more imagination in Tokyo Gore Police, but I do think there's quite a bit of imagination in this movie. And again, just like Tokyo Gore Police, you can tell they didn't have a huge budget, especially not as big a budget as they would have to want to do all the things they do in this movie. But despite not having that much money, they still go all out and do all the things they want to do in this movie. Rough around the edges, yes. Crazy, yes. Over the top, yes. That's what makes it so much fun. Number 4, Suicide Club. Again, trigger warning, all the triggers, every trigger you think about, just warning, trigger warning about that, okay? Trigger warning, trigger warning. This is another one by Sion Sono, and this is my favorite Sion Sono movie. And special accommodation to the unofficial sequel to this, Noriko's Dinner Table, which isn't really a sequel, it's more of a side story. That would have made this list, but it does fit more onto the drama side of things. But Suicide Club and Noriko's Dinner Table are very good back-to-back, both very good movies. This is a horror movie and a bit of a dark comedy. Dealing with subject matter that a lot of people are sensitive to, I understand that, but I do think that this is a very good movie, and I do think that we need to have movies about this dark subject matter, because as much as we don't want to think about that subject matter, we should think about that subject matter, and that's just how it is. And yes, it is a dark comedy, an emphasis on dark, okay? So the movie opens with 50-some-odd Japanese schoolgirls, smiling Japanese schoolgirls, holding hands and jumping in front of a moving train. This is one of the bloodiest scenes I've ever seen in a movie. Arterial spray all over the place. I would have to say this is the best blood spray in a movie. Okay, maybe not arterial spray, but but blood splatter nonetheless. Ugh. And this is the catalyst for this sudden boom of suicides in Japan. But it's not handled in the way that you would expect in a movie like this. In something like this, you would expect something like something like Smile, where the person is in a trance and it's some kind of curse that leads them into killing themselves. But that's not the case in Suicide Club. In this one, it's about a suicide fad. People are killing themselves because it's the hip thing to do in this world, and that is interesting commentary because you see fads all over the place, especially now with YouTube and TikTok, people doing what they can to get noticed, and the way they want to get noticed is by doing what everybody else does. So Suicide Club is an interesting commentary on something like that, just taking it to the extreme. And we can't say that it's unrealistic because there are some dangerous fads out there. We all remember the Tide Pod fad, where people would, eat Tide Pods, and, and there are plenty of videos of people doing something very dangerous. There was a video, I can't remember who it was, but they wanted to see if a gun could shoot through a really thick book, and of course it didn't end well. So, yeah, something like this, it is taking it to an extreme, but I'm not surprised by, violence becoming a fad, because we've kind of seen it before, people doing violent things for the sake of internet clout.
自殺クラブから皆に告ぐ我々は先発する
I have a hard time recommending something like this to everybody because I know there are people out there who do suffer from these kinds of thoughts. So, yeah, I would just say, just because of that, okay, if you are someone who is struggling with this kind of stuff, seek some help. I'm just a schmuck on the internet, so I don't know anything about this, but there are a lot of places you can go to get that kind of help, better than some dumbass on the internet talking about movies. But yes, so if you are curious about watching Suicide Club, keep that in mind, that this is a movie about that subject matter. So, yeah, I do recommend this movie, but a few asterisks after that. So, yeah, your mental health is more important than seeing this movie. So, yeah, just keep that in mind.
幻覚見ちゃうんですけどね。あ、知りたいじゃねえかよ。どうもありがとうございました。
Number 3, Perfect Blue.
I absolutely refuse to do it.
I'm legitimately shocked that this made it so high on the list. When I was making the list, I had a feeling this was going to make it on there, but as I did the ranking, it just kept creeping higher and higher up, and it made it to the number 3 spot, Perfect Blue. I did a review of this, because I've seen this movie pretty recently. I won't say too recently, but within the past year or two, I was able to check this out. I want to make it clear, I said this in the review of that movie, and I will say it again here, I am not a big anime guy. I have nothing against anime. I understand why people love it so much. I've tried to partake in a few anime things, and I've liked it, but I've had no desire to return to a lot of this stuff. Perfect Blue was recommended a lot to me, and when I went into it, I decided, okay, let's put the anime thing aside and go into this as a horror movie. And speaking as a horror fan, going into this as a horror movie, this movie is great. It's a psychological horror movie. It's a bit of a descent into madness movie, and I love descent into madness movies. I think those are some of the most suspenseful horror movies made. You have this pop singer who is retiring from being a pop singer, and she's trying to become a serious actress, and she's dealing with, people telling her who she is, people wanting her to return to the pop singer world, wondering if she can become an actress. Fans kind of turning against her because she's going down a different path. She starts losing herself, losing who she is, because being a pop singer was such a big part of her personality, and now she's transitioning into this more adult way of being. She was viewed as someone pure, and now she's essentially becoming a more adult-oriented actress.
Is that really the job that you wanted? It's the pit.
And as this is happening, as she's losing her sanity, she has this creepy guy stalking her, so she has to worry about that while she's also worrying about drifting further and further into madness.
I'll always be with you and I'll never change. Not a bit. But I have a problem. It's that imposter. She keeps getting in my way.
This is not a movie that's about the kills, but there are some good kills in here. It's more about the psychological trauma. There are some quality kills in here, and they are hard-hitting kills, and I talked about this in my review, but I'll talk about it again here. The reason I think these kills are so good, because there's a stabbing in this movie that is a real punch in the face, and I think it's because it is animated. Because this is an animated movie, you don't really have to cut away from the gore. You don't have to put cuts in there. You don't have to worry about the lighting in order to make the practical kill look practical. You don't have to worry about covering real life with CGI to do the gore and worrying about that blending in properly. Because everything is hand-drawn, you can show everything right on the screen. And so the impacts can have a little more of an impact. The blood can have a little more of a spray to it. It's very... I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's just so well done. And the movie is only 80 some odd minutes long, so it's not even a full 90 minutes, and they managed to tell this rich psychological horror movie in that short amount of time, and I applaud that. I don't know if I'm going to talk about more anime-related stuff on this channel. I might, but I'm just going to say don't get your hopes up for that, because again, I'm not a huge anime guy. I have nothing but respect for anime and people who enjoy it. But Perfect Blue, I mean, if it's an anime movie that I love this much, then you know it's gotta be worth watching. If you're not an anime person, I would still recommend checking out Perfect Blue and watching it as a horror movie, because as a horror movie, it's great. Horror fans, I mean, if you're a horror fan, I definitely say check out Perfect Blue.
Somebody help me!
Like anyone can hear you right now!
Who are you? Why?
Number 2, Audition. We all knew this one was coming. When it comes to Japanese horror movies, this is one of the most notorious. It's one of my all-time favorite Takashi Miike movies. I do love Ichi the Killer a little more, but we already went into why that's not on the list. Audition became so notorious so fast that it is one of those movies that is hurt by its reputation. You hear, oh, this is the scariest movie of all time, this is the most disturbing movie of all time, and then you finally watch it. Yeah, it can be overhyped. Just because something's overhyped doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that newcomers to the film might be let down by it. Especially given the fact that Audition is a slow burn. This has some very disturbing stuff in it, but it doesn't happen until the third act of the film. Hell, even closer to the end of the movie is when it really starts happening. And as disturbing as it is, you have to get through a lot of slow stuff. And again, I don't mean slow in a bad way. It's good slow pacing, but it's just that it's one of those... It's a proper slow burn horror movie. I've said this before, what makes for a good slow burn horror movie is when the movie itself is focusing on a different genre outside of horror, and you have horror slowly happening around the edges of the story, and as we get closer and closer to the climax, the horror starts to slowly invade the story, and then as we get to the big moment, it completely takes over the story. Audition is a romantic drama. We're following this middle-aged widower who wants to start dating again, and he wants to date someone younger, he wants to find someone, but he doesn't want to date too many people, he wants to get married as soon as possible, because let's face it, he's not getting any younger, And a friend of his who works in the movie business comes up with this idea, hey, why don't we hold a fake audition for a movie and meet women that way? And the main character is a very nice guy, or at least he comes across as a very nice guy, but he goes along with this very sexist idea.
で、ちょっと椅子の周りを歩いて。振り返って。次行こうか。
The woman who he picks is so nice, she comes across as so sweet, but we learn that there's something wrong with her, and then as the movie goes on, his world and her world collide, and dear God. The climax is notorious amongst Japanese horror fans, but what I think is one of the scariest moments is where he says he's going to call the woman, and she says, oh yes, I'll wait for her call, and then we cut to her in her apartment staring at her phone. Just these moments, she's just staring at her phone, she's not doing anything else, she's just watching her phone, and that is some of the creepiest shit you will ever see. And what makes it even creepier is that there's a bag in the background, and you know what's in that bag, and then the bag moves. The climax of the film is made all the more effective by the safe movie that we've had before it. So I do highly recommend Audition to people if you want to see a good horror movie, but you have to keep in mind that it is a slow burn. It is going to be a romantic drama for a good portion of the movie before we get into the disturbing stuff. It's not going to happen until closer to the end. There are good slow burns and there are bad slow burns. Audition is a good slow burn. But in terms of Japanese horror movies, there can only be one that outdoes all of them. This is my favorite Japanese horror movie, and it is, I think we can all agree that it's the most notorious Japanese horror movie. It's not the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to Japanese horror, but it is a horror movie, and we can all, it instantly pops in our head with a very familiar sound. Number 1, Godzilla. I've been a Godzilla fan for so many years. I was a Godzilla fan before I was a Japanese horror fan. I love the goofy rubber suits, I love the monster brawls, I absolutely adore Godzilla. But the original Godzilla is a horror movie. People don't think of Godzilla as a horror movie because of all that followed it, because it became about the monster brawls, it became about the campiness and the fun. But people need to understand that the first Godzilla from 1954 is a serious horror movie. Again, this came out in 1954 in Japan, 10 years after the bomb was dropped on Japan. Godzilla is a metaphor for the nuclear bomb. There are so many things that happen in this movie that are metaphors to nuclear bombs and nuclear radiation. I would recommend looking more into it, but there's a lot about this out there. I highly recommend doing the research. Now, there is the American version of Godzilla with American actors put in and dubbing and all that, but if you're going to watch Godzilla, I suggest watching the original Japanese cut of Godzilla, because the tone of that movie is heavy. I mean, it's weird to say this about a Godzilla movie, given all the memes and all the silly videos we've seen and all the fun monster brawls that we love. But the original Godzilla is heavy. There are some dark, dark moments in Godzilla. The moment that sticks out to me and that sticks out to many people is you see this woman with her children, and her children are huddled around her as the buildings are collapsing around them. And she says, "Don't cry, we're gonna be with your father soon." Godzilla is treated with all the seriousness that something like this would be treated with if it happened in real life. It's treated more like a natural disaster, or an unnatural disaster if you view it from the point of a nuclear bomb. You see people crushed under rubble, you see kids in hospitals, and they have this radiation detector going over them, and it's going crazy, and you just see the doctors shaking their head at each other.
こちらは一旦外海へ逃れた模様であります。新たに山中市を標とする対策研究班が設置されました。この時間の主な項目でありましたニュースをご案内。
I love the whole Godzilla series. Yes, there are movies that are too cheesy, that are less enjoyable, but there are some great, fun movies in it. But the original Godzilla, it's a horror movie. It's scary by the standards of back then. The ideas of it are treated in a frightening way, and it is such a heavy movie, but a great movie done in a heavy way. I had to show respect to Godzilla. It is without question my favorite Japanese horror movie, one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I would say it's at least in the top 20. I love Godzilla. There's not much else I can really say about it except... There you have it, everybody. My top 10 favorite Japanese horror movies. There are a lot of Japanese horror movies that I haven't seen yet, like Onibaba and House from the 70s. I do want to check those out. I'll try to get around to doing that eventually. And a special commendation to Kwaidan or Kwaidan. I watched that movie very recently. That's why it didn't make the list. I wanted it to sit with me a little longer. But, yeah. There you have it, my top 10 favorite Japanese horror movies. And now, this is where you can come in. Leave your top 10 favorite Japanese horror movies down below. If you have more than that, by all means put that. If you have less than that, put that too. I just want to know what Japanese horror movies you love. And with that, thank you all so much for joining me for this video. I've been wanting to do more top 10 lists because people seem to enjoy them. I've just been having a hard time thinking of which ones I want to do. But let me know if there are any other countries you'd like me to cover in terms of top 10 horror movies from that country. Excluding Italian horror, because yes, I do love Italian horror, but I talk about Italian horror a lot on this channel already, and I'm going to be talking about it so much more. We'll probably get a top 10 list related to Italian horror sometime soon, but let me know if there are any other countries you would like me to cover in a top 10 list. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for the continued support on this channel. It really does mean a lot to me. I cannot thank you enough for the fact that people seem to enjoy this little thing I do here. But with that, I hope you're having a great day, and this is the Maniac here to remind you that the Grindhouse will never die.